Thank you. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. I would love to tell you a little bit about myself and how I came to start the organization TogetherSF, what we're all about, and then talk to you about what's on your ballot right now, that things that you'll be voting on in the next 2 weeks. Election day is November 5th. You are a San Francisco voter. You've already received your ballot in the mail, and we hope that you fill it out and turn it in. So, thank you so much, Nicole, for having me here. You guys have been doing incredible work. Together SF, I started the organization in March of 2020. Prior to that, I had worked as a city planner for the city of San Francisco. So I've worked in the city's bureaucracy, as a legislative aide at the Board of Supervisors. I worked as an aide for Mark Farrell, who's one of the candidates for mayor. And then I also worked in the administration of Mayor Breed, our current mayor. So I have a really great perspective, sort of a 360 view of how our city works and runs. And it was that experience that radicalized me to leave City Hall and build a community-based organization. I felt very strongly that the city needed a voice for the average San Franciscan. When decisions are being made in City Hall, we are really hearing from three very well-organized groups that show up on every issue. And those are lobbyists, public sector labor unions, and a really well-organized group of community activists that usually work with or around city-funded nonprofits. And so the general interest of the average San Franciscan is really left out of that conversation because most of us are too busy living our lives, taking care of our families, doing our jobs to come to City Hall every Tuesday at 2 o'clock to give public comment. And so our voices are really left out of the conversation. And the whole purpose of Together SF is to find all of us, connect us, inform us, educate us, engage us, and ensure that we are all super informed and confident voters and that we are voting consistently. Now, I left City Hall in 2020, so this was right before the pandemic, actually, because the city was already feeling like it was getting off the right tracks, right? Already felt like the city needed to make a big change, and that was the whole purpose of the organization. But obviously, with the pandemic and the lagging recovery post-pandemic, I think we all feel that a lot more. We all feel these problems that the city isn't really being responsive to residents, isn't solving the priorities that we all feel. And this is felt across the board, whether it's residents, merchants, even elected officials express frustration at how hard it is to navigate the city and change course. There is just so much bureaucracy in how our government is structured. Together SF focuses on 4 key areas: economic prosperity, the recovery and restoration of downtown, securing a strong, robust tax base, job opportunities for people who come here, street conditions. This includes the homelessness crisis, tent encampments, the open air drug markets, the overdoses that we're seeing on our street. All of this contributes to an environment in our city that I think feels dysfunctional and chaotic and makes it hard for communities to thrive. Public safety. We still have some of the highest petty crimes and property crime rates in the state. And there hasn't been a concerted effort to get that back on track. And so public safety and street conditions, are another driver of what's hampering our economic recovery as well. And then the underlying issue for all of this for us is the governance of our city. How is our city structure actually allowing the people we elect into office to run the city? How can that be reformed? And is it as efficient and effective as it could be? So I'll focus more on the governance point today because that's one of our big priorities on the ballot this November. We feel very strongly that the government structure, there is no governing central authority in San Francisco. So people often say we are a strong mayor, we are a strong board of supervisors, we have a commission system, we have direct democracy. It's hard to say who's actually in charge. And that is what a lot of incumbent politicians point to. They're often pointing fingers at each other and saying, well, this person blocked me or this commission blocked me. It's hard to tell who's actually in charge for the average person. We have a lot of political infighting as a result of this, right? We're all tired of hearing people blaming each other and not taking accountability. And, as San Franciscans, we've seen our budget more than double in the last 10 years. We're now approaching $16 billion. I think all of us would say we have not seen a doubling in the quality or quantity of services, right? We are actually seeing a decline in that. And so where is this all going? How is this not being efficient? A $16 billion city, we should not have people living outside. We should not have people dying outside. That is certainly unacceptable. And that's a big change we want to see. The organization is designed to address the drivers of dysfunction that we've identified, which is the lack of really informed, knowledgeable voters who have the information to vote for their best interest, elected officials who do not consistently show strong leadership, and then, of course, these structural government issues. So we have TogetherSF Action, which is our political advocacy arm, and then TogetherSF, which is our community organizing arm. We have prioritized Proposition D. This is a proposition that we wrote last year. We gathered signatures for to place on the ballot. I have our voter guides here. They might be passed around as well, which will go over everything, but I really want to focus on Proposition D because it is a huge opportunity to reform the structure of our city government. So many of you have probably heard that San Francisco has a unique commission system. So we have the mayor, who is the chief executive. That's the executive branch. We have a board of supervisors. That's our legislative branch. And they should be providing a check and balance on the mayor's power. The mayor is ultimately responsible for the administration of the city departments, of which we have 52, 30,000 employees, 52 departments. What's unique in San Francisco is since the last time the charter was rewritten in 1996, we have added 106 different new charter amendments that have created commissions. So between the executive and the departments, there sit a whole tier of city commissions, 130 of them to be exact in San Francisco. So 1,200 unelected volunteers are actually providing the oversight of these city departments and are often a blocker to how the people that we elect want to have city departments carry out their visions. So one big example is the Police Commission. The Police Commission is a 7-member body. 4 of them are appointed by the mayor. 3 of them are appointed by the Board of Supervisors. Now, the mayor's 4 appointees have to be confirmed by the Board of Supervisors, much like a Supreme Court justice nomination and appointment process. But the board's 3 appointees do not have any, the mayor doesn't have any role in approving or confirming the board's appointees. Then once people are appointed into these positions, they are essentially untouchable for 4 years. We as voters have no recourse over them. We didn't pick them, but they're also unaccountable to the people that appointed them. And so what's happened in San Francisco is that the mayor has appointed people to the police commission who are no longer aligned with her perspective of how policing should be handled in San Francisco. And they're very publicly out of step with her and very vocally opposed to her vision of how policing should be managed. And she has no recourse or authority to remove them. So what Proposition D does is a couple of things. The first thing is it requires the city to carry out a 1.5-year-long public process to cut the number of commissions from 130 to 65. So it'll be a year long. There'll be a task force that works on this. There'll be public engagement. There'll have to be legislation that gets passed, but the city will have to cut the number in half. And given that we have 52 departments, we feel very confident that 65 commissions is more than enough to provide the oversight for the 52 departments with buffer room, right? Another big change it does is it removes the requirement that the Board of Supervisors has to approve the mayor's appointees. So it makes it very clear the mayor gets their appointees, the board gets theirs, and there's no sort of cross-referencing. And it allows whoever appointed somebody to be able to remove somebody. The reason we're doing this is that the person that we all know is the mayor, right? Most people don't know who their representative is on the Board of Supervisors. But the mayor we all vote for, we all hold accountable. And it's very frustrating to hear a mayor say, well, my police commission isn't able to do this, or the homeless commission isn't doing what I want. We want to remove those barriers so that the mayor can actually be held accountable for the things that we elect them for. And so we're giving the mayor and the board, the people that we elect, full control over how the city departments are run so that we as voters can hold them accountable. So that's what Prop D does. It is a pretty broad, it's a pretty big deal in San Francisco because no one has attempted this effort to change the structure in over 20 years. That was the last time the city structure was really changed. But, you know, dissatisfaction with city government is at an all-time high right now, and people really want change. And we're really excited to present this opportunity to have true reform, change, and accountability restored to City Hall. So we're strongly asking voters for a yes on D. I also want to talk about a countermeasure that's been put on. This is Proposition E. It has been put on by Supervisor Aaron Peskin. If you don't know who he is actually the longest serving member on the Board of Supervisors. He's finishing up his 16th year right now. He figured out a loophole where if you do 2 terms, you go away, you come back and get 2 more terms. And so he has been kind of the architect of designing this system, and he doesn't want it to change. And so he put on a countermeasure, which is Prop E. Typically, what happens is when you have 2 measures that sound the same, it really confuses voters, and they usually vote no on both. And that's really the strategy that he's trying to carry out and to avoid any real changes, which is obviously what we're advocating for. So we're recommending a no on E. A really dangerous thing that I think Prop E does that doesn't really get discussed is it sounds like it's going to change the commission structure, but actually what it does is create a commission on commissions. So the city will then study it. There's no mandate to change anything. There's no timelines. But actually what's quite dangerous is that it requires that 3 out of the 5 people on that commission on commissions have to be city employees. And then that commission gets to legislate the laws around commissions. So it's a new set of powers. It's pretty unprecedented to give city employees, unelected people, the ability to legislate. That is something that is really unique and would be a brand new set of powers, and we think is a huge overreach, and exactly the opposite of what we're trying to do, which is sort of curtail this bureaucracy. So we are strongly recommending a no on E. Yeah. Is that okay? Yeah.
So I was going to ask about the previous graph. Is that per capita? Because we were showing different
It's not per
cities.
capita.
Okay. So on this, San Francisco is way out of whack with these other cities. Question is, how do those cities fare? Is there
Sorry, this graph is per capita.
Okay, oh, it is per capita.
Yeah.
Okay. So this actually has the data in it. It's
Yeah.
showing. And so I'm always looking at causal linkages. I agree that these commissions are going to be inefficient when you get so many voices involved. You get gridlock and you're not going to get decisions made. And the decisions that are made may not be better.
Right.
So by cutting this down to the 65, is that going to lead to some of these improvements in log jams?
We certainly believe it will. And the way we landed on this policy is we actually commissioned a study out of the Rose Institute of Local and State Government at Claremont McKenna College in Southern California. They're a statewide policy institute. And we asked them to study San Francisco's government and recommend changes of how we could restructure it to be more efficient. And they conducted about 30 interviews of current and former city elected officials and department heads, and of course did academic research. And this was one of their 4 recommendations, because what the commission structure has done is really the things I outlined. It's diffused authority and accountability, makes it really hard for the public to engage. And I think, you know, the opposition argument is that we're cutting democracy, we're cutting the opportunity for citizen engagement. Obviously, 65 commissions is still more than enough places for all of us to engage. And the average person, there's no way we're tracking these commissions, right? As well as the 5 committees of the Board of Supervisors and the Board of Supervisors. There will still be plenty of places to have that direct democracy voice with significant improvements in accountability.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, wait. Yeah.
I'm gonna go through a couple of ballot measures and what are our priorities, and then I'm happy to, we can just jump to Q&A after that. Great. And I'm happy to talk about anything on the ballot. Our voter guide covers everything, or just your general questions about how our city government is run. Another big opportunity to restore public safety, there's actually 2 ballot measures that are trying to address our public safety conditions in San Francisco and California. One is Prop 36. This is a statewide measure. This was put on by advocacy groups, and it is designed to reform Prop 47, which was passed in 2014 by voters. Prop 47 was very well intentioned. It was designed to reduce prison populations and move forward criminal justice reform policies. But many people blame it for what we've seen as huge increases in retail theft. So if you've seen, you know, the videos of people walking into Walgreens and just clearing out shelves, why your toothpaste is locked up, your laundry detergent is locked up, people blame that on Prop 47, because what Prop 47 did was raise the threshold to $950 of what counts as a misdemeanor in a petty crime. So now, people engaging in these crimes know that they can steal up to $950 before the police will care. When you've combined this with a fentanyl crisis that hit this state, with the police shortages, we've just seen explosions in this type of behavior. And that's what Prop 36 is trying to do. It creates a new category called treatment mandated felonies so that the DAs, the district attorneys, can use mandated treatment as a way to get people committing these crimes who are struggling with addiction into actual treatment rather than back into prison. And it is supported by a pretty broad coalition. The state polling on this is about 70% favorable, so it's most likely to pass. And we think it will go a long way towards restoring sort of the sanity in our commercial corridors and the way that small business, especially retail, is struggling. Do you want me to do Q&A as we're doing this? I'm happy to do it.
I think it's fine. Let's just
Yeah.
go through and then we can open it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, was there a question specifically about this? Okay. Is that okay?
Me.
Just please be mindful of
This is
your
a very
time.
quick question. Is this citywide or is this statewide?
This is a state measure.
Okay.
Yeah.
How will prosecution need to change? Like, it seems like prosecutors have more of an impact post-arrest on these sorts of things. So while this lowers the threshold for,
It doesn't actually lower the value threshold from 950. It just creates a new category of treatment mandated felonies.
that's it.
Yeah. So it's pretty targeted to addressing the unique interaction we're seeing with drug addiction and retail theft. I'm fine.
If you're okay. with
I'm
it.
totally okay. I'm totally okay. Yeah.
We're recording. So.
Oh, you're recording. Okay, great. Okay. I have a lot of experience, drug addiction. I have a lot of experience working with the homeless. I take harm reduction supplies in and out to around encampments, including wound care supplies. And Prop 36, in my opinion, won't do a thing to address crime. For example, when I was arrested, the only time I've been arrested was for a drug drug issue. Second day I was there, I was offered meth. I didn't take it at the time because I needed to be clear-headed, right? But you can get drugs, you get meth, get anything you want in the prison population, okay? Second of all, there are so many studies out there, and most recently, a really broad-reaching study has found that Prop 47 did not increase significantly by any stretch of the imagination crime, retail theft, etc. You saw little bumps in the first 2 years of Prop 47, but you didn't see this hysterical number of hordes of people enter into retail theft. Plus, crime went down after the 2 years that it was voted upon, right? Then got enacted. So, and there's one other thing I want to say. I do have a question. We vote for supervisors, do we not?
Yeah.
Okay, you're talking about people having a voice. Well, our voice is in those supervisors. And by Prop D, you will take that voice away. Because you're getting rid of the middlemen, which we vote for, the supervisors. So how do you resolve that contradiction, number one? And number two, isn't it just a centralized power grab by London Breed? I mean, come on, we're talking about a mayor who had people sign loyalty oaths. You kidding me? And I want checks and balances, just like our Constitution provides.
Yeah.
Just like we have Congress and the president. You understand?
Yeah,
Okay,
I do
so my
understand.
question is, how do you reconcile the contradiction between taking away the voter's voice by getting rid of the board of and the police commission?
Yeah.
Also,
Yeah. So the measure doesn't touch the Board of Supervisors. It doesn't touch the Board of Supervisors at all. And it doesn't. It doesn't. They have seats on commissions. Their power doesn't change. They actually get a little bit more power because they get to decide which commissions get consolidated or eliminated or changed. That's ultimately a legislative power that the Board of Supervisors gets to make. That's what the measure does. It opens that conversation for them. It also doesn't remove the police commission. The police commission continues to exist, and it continues to have the disciplinary and oversight powers over the police officers. So for the police commission, the specific change is that the mayor would no longer need confirmation from the Board of Supervisors of her appointees. But the board still gets their appointee. So the board still has representation and the mayor has theirs. I disagree with that characterization of it. Yeah, we can disagree on that. No, that's okay. Yeah, yeah. Okay, I'll go to the next measure, which is Prop F. This is a measure put on by Supervisor Matt Dorsey, a member of the Board of Supervisors. You may be aware that San Francisco's police department is short-staffed. The city's supposed to have about 2,000 police officers. Right now, we have about 1,500. So we are short about 500 officers, and the city anticipates that number going up as people retire. This measure is a 10-year program designed to incentivize officers who are close to retirement, to incentivize them to push that retirement off a couple of years and return to more street level policing. So for example, if you're like a sergeant, you're in a management position, you're close to retirement, it will give you a financial incentive to push off your retirement and instead get back to street level policing, because that's really where we're having a shortfall in the number of officers that are out there actually responding to calls and cases as they happen. This is part of the city's sort of 10-year strategy to restore SFPD. They do believe it will take about 10 years to fill that staffing shortage. And this is one of the proposals to address that. So we're recommending yes on F, because the shortage in police staffing is a big part of, I think, the frustration we all feel when you call the police and it takes a long time to get someone to come. Just one example of this is that the city's police department is divided up into district stations, right? So the Richmond District Police precinct is pretty large. It's not just the Richmond, it goes down into like Laurel Village, a little bit of Anza Vista. It's pretty large. There used to be about 10 officers, 10 to 15 that patrolled every night. Now they're down to 2 to 4. So you can imagine that's a large area to cover. And this is why, people feel very frustrated about things like not getting a police response to a garage break-in, a car break-in. It is really a staffing shortage, and this is something the measure is trying to address over the long term. Another measure that we're prioritizing, because this is related to economic recovery, is Prop M. So Prop M aims to reform our gross receipts tax. This is one of the business taxes that San Francisco businesses have to pay. This is a consensus measure. It's supported by the mayor, a majority of the Board of Supervisors, business groups, labor, small business. What it does is change who pays what taxes. So it completely exempts small businesses under $5 million from any business taxes. So this supports restaurants and your neighborhood retail. It also reduces taxes for the largest employers in the city. So this is businesses that are over $1 billion. So think Google, Uber, they get us reduction in taxes. And so for that reason, because we want to support the businesses that create the most jobs and generate the most revenue that supports all of our city's social services, and we want to support the neighborhood small businesses, we're supporting this measure and encouraging a yes vote on it. And then finally, we're supporting Mark Farrell for mayor. I think you guys have heard from many of the mayoral candidates. I think I have a unique perspective, having worked in City Hall, having worked for Mark, having worked for Mayor Breed. I've seen sort of their different approaches to managing and running the city. And I think given this moment in time in San Francisco, where we are at a really pivotal point in our city, how are we going to move forward out of COVID recovery? Our downtown is we're the lowest performing in post-pandemic recovery, close to 40% office vacancy rates. We're having a public safety crisis. We're having a homelessness crisis despite our massive budget. We really feel strongly that Mark has the right combination of public sector and private sector experience, given that he's the only candidate that has worked in the private sector that is, financially has the knowledge of how to manage the city budget, having been budget chair and having run businesses. This is why we're supporting Mark for mayor, and we're encouraging, ranked choice voting. Our voter guide, actually in the bottom of it, there's a yellow box inside that has a QR code for a video about how ranked choice voting works. We're really encouraging you to use ranked choice voting and to vote for 3 candidates. We're encouraging ranking Mark #1. Don't rank anybody you can't live with, and rank other candidates that you can live with. And that's the best way to do ranked choice voting. Don't overthink it, and don't feel like you have to rank everyone. I think these are the last slides I have. I'm happy to talk about any other measures or questions that you have. Yeah, or sorry.
On Prop M,
Yeah.
you were talking about small businesses, and that's great because they, that's a huge impact, and these are low margin businesses. Secondly, on the large companies, is it the number of employees like you're saying there on the slide, or is it by their size and revenue?
It's actually the gross receipts, so it's closer to revenue.
Okay, as opposed to the number of employees.
That's right.
Yeah, because I was thinking that's also a benefit, right? If you have a
Yes.
large employer, you're trying to encourage them to come in to swell the number of jobs.
That's right.
Pop up.
And one more point about Prop M is, the city only wants to be revenue neutral, right? They don't want to have a tax measure that reduces revenue. So inherently what happens is that the measure picks winners and losers in different industries and business sizes. So it is really the companies that are in that mid-size between 50 million and 1 billion that see a pretty significant tax increase to support small business getting 0 taxes and large business getting a reduction.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I got a question. My name is Ellen. I am one of the 13 candidates for mayor. And your organization discriminated me because I'm the only Republican candidate. And you organization going out there telling all the people, voters, only 5 people for your organization to present to vote, which means you are election interfering the voters in San Francisco. And I ask you to stop because it's illegal for what you do and presenting only 5 people to people when we have 13 people. Thank you.
Was that a question, or we're doing questions right now, I believe?
Proposition L, it looks like
Yeah.
you guys are against it.
We are.
From what I understand, San Francisco, this is the ballot measure to increase funding for Muni by
That's right.
imposing
A new tax.
a new tax.
Yes.
And that's on rideshare.
Yes.
So Muni super underfunded. I think it's like 200 mil that they're under. How do you guys propose, like, what's the positive case for getting Muni funding if you guys are against that one?
There's a couple of reasons that we're opposing Prop L. So Prop L is a new tax on rideshare. So it'll be on Waymo, Lyft, and Uber. And I think it's going to generate $20 to $50 million annually. And Muni has a $200 million deficit, right? The reasons that we're opposing it are a couple. One, Prop M was designed as a consensus measure that reduced taxes on a number of these businesses, including those 3 rideshare companies, right? And the deal with the organizations and activist groups around it was that we'll get through Prop M, and then we'll find a way to backfill Muni, including the revenue that Prop M will raise, right? Like that money, some of that money will go to Muni. So let's work together on that. And, the organizations that put on Prop L then kind of went ahead and did it anyways. And I think that's a big part of like why we have the dysfunction that we have, is like we're trying to work together to come up with these solutions. It's not really fair to then go around and cut out new deals. That's one reason. The other reason is that the Muni deficit is sort of a temporary post-pandemic deficit, right? Because we haven't seen ridership come back. We haven't seen the funding levels restore as a result of that. So this tax is not a time-limited tax, right? If it was time-limited to just address a shortfall that we're having for a few years, I think that's a different story, but this is a tax in perpetuity. And then it doesn't even address the whole shortfall, right? It is addressing maybe a quarter of it at max. And so it feels like we're penalizing companies that already agreed to a tax deal to not really solve the problem, and it is also going to penalize them in perpetuity. I think obviously funding Muni and ensuring that we have a robust transportation system is a huge priority for us. We just don't think this is the right approach and are happy to, look to a consensus measure that does that in the future.
Do you think there's a way that Muni gets rid of that deficit via like just ridership, or do you think
No,
it's going
I
to be
don't.
via
I
like
do think there
extra
has to be
funding
something
sources?
else. I also think Muni is a pretty well-funded agency. And I think, the problem with San Francisco is not that we don't have enough revenue, right? It's a spending problem. And so there have to be other things that have to be done. With the size of the budgets that these departments have, they should be able to deliver more efficient services. And I think Muni should be able to do that.
Cool, thanks.
I had a quick question on gross receipts. Like,
Yeah.
what does it mean? And I remember there was a time when certain taxes were passed and they seemed to disproportionately affect payments companies.
That's
because
right.
their revenue is calculated differently. And it seemed very political and nobody
Yes.
seemed to talk about it because like the person who was running it was influential and still
Yes.
is. And so, but it disproportionately affected some great employers who had to move out to
Leave
South
out
San
the city.
Francisco and others. And so I'm curious, is there like any trend to reversing those?
Yes, yes. Great question. So what he's referring to is in 2018, voters passed Proposition C, which was an increase in gross receipts tax. Gross receipts is literally how much money you receive as a company. It's not revenue, it's how much money comes in the door. The way 2018 Prop C was written really unfairly penalized financial tech companies because, for example, Stripe, right? If you make a purchase for $10, that $10 flows through Stripe. So Stripe is then going to get taxed on those $10. But Stripe doesn't keep the $10, right? Stripe keeps like 2 cents of that transaction. So they're having to pay a tax on $10 when really they're only receiving 2 cents. And so this kind of really unfairly penalized financial tech companies. And it's why Stripe left the city and Square left the city. And we've stopped seeing innovation in financial tech in San Francisco. Prop M actually cleans that up. It fixes that problem. Which is another big benefit of voting for it because it was a big mistake that I think only kind of insiders really understood and was hard to communicate to voters in that time when Prop C was being sold as a way to resolve homelessness by increasing that tax funding.
Hi, I had a few questions about two different props, especially when we're talking about gross receipts or the city not having a funding problem, we have a spending problem. The first one is on Prop A.
Yeah.
And especially with not the superintendent,
Yeah.
the head of,
The
stepping down.
superintendent, yeah.
Yeah, the superintendent stepping down. That's the first thing, meaning what I'm asking is, can we fix the budget problem for the education board without having to tax the people?
Yeah.
That's the first one. And then the second one is on Prop F, which I know you're also for.
Yeah.
Just because there is a greater weight put on if we keep policemen past their retirement date instead of getting new policemen to enter into the force. Just the budget is a little bit wonky. So I just wanted a little bit more information about this.
Sure, sure. So let's talk about Prop A first. Prop A is a school bond. It's designed to be a capital improvements bond and improve the school facilities in San Francisco. Two big selling points for us is that San Francisco schools don't all have working PA systems. So if there's an emergency, they can't actually alert all the classrooms, which is just like a complete failure of the school district, honestly, that our kids are in such unsafe situations. They also, the bond money will also fund central kitchens so that the kids can have better quality hot meals. About 40% of SFUSD kids get all of their primary nutrition from school. And so it is really a social service program that we're trying to support with Prop A. The way that bonds work in San Francisco, and this is more specific to Prop B, which is another bond than Prop A, is so bonds are the city borrowing against future tax revenue. And in San Francisco, we have a really actually thoughtful bond program where as one bond gets paid off, we approve a new bond to get slotted in. So our taxes don't go up, they just don't come down when a bond sunsets. So even with Prop A, I don't think there's an increase in taxes, but it's a school bond, so it's a separate structure, and it requires 55% voter approval to pass. I think your question is more about like, how can we ensure this money is going to be properly and efficiently spent? That is a very challenging thing for the school district to promise because they haven't done that and they don't have a good track record of doing that. The bonds do come with bond oversight committees, but it's very obvious that they have not done a great job managing the bond spending. For us, we're weighing out the critical need the district has. And these two things, specifically school security and feeding programs, are such a high need that we're willing to sort of give the district this money. This money is not going to do anything to solve the budget deficit that the district has or the management issues they have with the superintendent. That's another problem they'll need to solve realistically with school closures and reducing staffing. But, you know, if this bond didn't pass, theoretically, the district could sell some of its properties and fund these needs. But, you know, I don't fully understand the school district politics, but for some reason, they don't seem interested in doing that. And then Prop F, I think your question was about sort of the value proposition of having retired officers stick around longer rather than getting new officers in the door. So a couple of issues. One is that nationwide, there is a trend where people don't want to be police officers, right? Like they're lining up to be firefighters. They're not lining up to be police officers. So it is very hard to fill an academy class. And that's why they're projecting a 10-year solution, because it's going to take that long to backfill and kind of restore essentially like positive PR about trying to get people to want to be police officers. And I think, you know, the state passed a law last year to require that you have to have a 4-year bachelor's degree to become a police officer. So, you know, the government is trying to make this a more higher profile, more professionalized workforce. And that is very good and important. But I think it's going to just take a little bit longer to get new people in the door as a result of that. The other issue is that when police officers come out of the academy, we actually don't have enough qualified, experienced officers to provide mentorship and training. And that is really something that young officers need in this very, you know, complicated, challenging job that they're doing. We do want to ensure that there are qualified, well-trained, more senior officers that can provide that. And that's a big part of what this is trying to solve as well. Yeah.
Thank you. On that, I think also taking people through the academy is a cost, and there's a delay. Like you said, you have to fill the classes, they have to move through the classes, they have to graduate the classes, they have to get mentored. If you want to have a direct impact, then bringing these officers who are already well adept at working together back into the workforce is actually a faster way to get that impact on the streets and measure whether 1,500 and is not as good as 1,600 or 1,700.
That's right. And a big driver of the shortfall is retirement, basically attrition. And so, you know, pushing that out is also going to be helpful. Another thing the city is considering to address this shortfall is the backlog in processing applications. You may have heard it takes the city, you know, 1.5 years to hire people. The applicant review and recruitment process is very, very complicated. Something simple that Mark Farrell is proposing is to outsource the review process. Right now, it's being done by retired SFPD officers who do it part-time. So we just we're not treating this recruitment and retention problem as we would, I think, if you were running a business or a company with some sense of urgency. And many other cities outsource it to third-party contractors with then providing oversight from the government. I think that's another solution that's being discussed.
I have a different question. One, I'm a big fan. I mean, this is the first time hearing you, but when I heard your colleagues present, I love your approach, you know, hyper local, very educated on the issues and, you know, not choosing sides, not coming from ideology, but what actually works. So I'm a huge fan of
you.
that. What's your vision for the future? Like, are you guys, I mean, I've been telling people, look at what TogetherSF is doing. That's what we need to replicate. And if we're going to fix our nation, we need to rebuild it from the ground up in every city and, you know, have a completely different approach. So when is Together San Jose going to be launched, for example?
We are still hyper local focused. We just got started in San Francisco, and I think we would all agree San Francisco has a long way to go in getting outcomes back on track, accountability back on track, and generally having San Franciscans feel like restore trust in our government. And so we have no plans to go anywhere else. There are folks in LA who are very interested in our model that I think are trying to do something similar. There's a new group that started in Oakland, Empower Oakland, I think, that's taken some of our ideas. And so I think other folks are trying to you know, do something based on what we're doing. We have a unique advantage here in San Francisco, and that's a very small town at the end of the day. And so it's sort of I think, more impactful to do the work here first. But thank you.
Prop 33,
Yeah.
couple questions.
Yeah.
Number one, does rent control work? Like, I've heard lots of things.
Yeah.
You know, it
Yeah.
increases rent, you know, in surrounding areas. It's non-targeted to folks that need help with rent the most.
Right.
Rent control on the surface sounds good, though, at least to me. And then
Yeah.
Prop 33 is also complicated because what it really does is just give the ability for local
Yes.
cities to make their own decisions around rent control. So I guess regardless of whether or not you like rent control, there's also a question of like, should cities have the ability to make those decisions for themselves? And then the third part of it is, if it does pass, what does San Francisco look like
Yeah.
specifically as a result of Prop 33?
So basically about rent control, I think the economic analysis of it is that rent control helps the people who are currently housed. So if you currently have rent control, it's wonderful. And I think it's done a lot to keep San Francisco having some of that kind of the unique spirit of San Francisco, right? People who got here 10, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, they get to stay here despite how unaffordable, boom or bust the city gets. And I think that is the value of rent control. It stabilizes people. Who it harms is people who don't live here yet. It really does impact how profitable new housing has to be. And so usually new housing is very expensive in places that have a lot of rent control because it has to make up for the artificially lowered rents. And so economists generally agree like rent control is a net negative. In San Francisco, we do have a very robust rent control program. And so what Prop 33 does is it repeals the Costa-Hawkins Act, which says basically that like rent control can't apply to anything after a certain date. And in a couple of years ago, when David Chu was still in the assembly, he did pass a state bill that expanded rent control past what it was previously, which I think was like somewhere in the 70s. I think he brought it up to like the 80s. So what would happen if Prop 33 passes is that local jurisdictions would get to pass new laws around rent control. So San Francisco's Board of Supervisors actually about 2 weeks ago preemptively passed a law saying that if 33 passes, they would extend rent control to everything that was built up to 1994. This is not it's controversial still, right? Because essentially it's assuming that when you build new housing, it's going to take 30 years for it to become profitable, and then rent control will go into effect. And obviously developers are saying 30 years is in a best case scenario if they're generating like X amount of profit every year for them to recoup their costs. And there is still a concern that it will stall housing construction. I think it's a tough policy to propose when we have a mandate from the state to build 82,000 units in the next 2 years, and we've built maybe a couple of hundred in the last 2 years. So we're nowhere near hitting our goals. And so it doesn't seem like this is the right time to enact an expansion of rent control in San Francisco. And just since we're on 33, which is another state measure, 34 is sort of the countermeasure to 33. So we're recommending no on 33, yes on 34. Prop 33 is put on by a guy out of LA that runs purportedly a healthcare foundation, but he basically takes his public funding, generates revenue out of that, and then uses that revenue to do politics. It's pretty controversial. So this is the third time he's put this measure on the ballot. The previous 2 times California voters have rejected it. And so Prop 34 is sort of a countermeasure to 33. What it requires is that if you receive public funding to run a healthcare foundation, you have to spend that money on healthcare. So it's designed to prevent him from doing this over and over again, essentially. And so it's not just San Francisco that has these little infights, it's the whole state. But we're yes on 34, no on 33 for those reasons.
So thank you for being here, by the way, and answering the questions, okay? Yeah. Mark Farrell, you were in City Hall when Mark Farrell was mayor, right? In what, 2018?
Yes. I mean, he was in 2018, but yes.
Yeah, right. That's what I meant, 2018. So his sweeps, do you know anything about his sweeps and the effectiveness of his sweeps that he did then?
What I know is that they happened, that there was department coordination to make them happen, and they happened for the 6 months that he was mayor.
Right. They were unmitigated disaster. and I say this empirically, so many complaints in terms of unhoused people rose like 20% by the population. And what had happened, he just simply swept people out of these industrial environments into neighborhoods, which is what you're seeing right now. So why the support for Farrell rather?
So our support
Thank
for,
you.
yeah. So let me talk about the sweeps question first. They are happening again now, right? Pretty much a similar model. If the city had spent the last 5 years building more shelter, right, and high quality shelter, we would be able to offer people a place to go that they might want to go instead of just taking their belongings and leaving them outside, which I agree is pushing people into more visible parts of the city and is not actually helping anybody. And I think it is very much sort of an election year. I'm getting heat for this. I'm going to start removing tents sort of situation. And to, I guess, my biggest point here is that the city could have been building shelters in the last 5 years, and they just stopped after the first big Embarcadero Navigation Center, which was a big point of frustration for me that it stopped after that. So I think there's a way to do it, and I think you do have to remove tent encampments because they're harmful to pretty much everybody. But we want to get people into shelter, into stability, and into better housing opportunities after that. The reason that we're supporting Mark is because I know that he wants to do that, and he's talked openly about that we do need to have centralized intake centers. We do need to have an expansion of shelter. The sort of opposition to that is that the city has prioritized for a long time only building permanent supportive housing. And that, I think, is not something we can scale to address the scale of homelessness we're seeing, not just in San Francisco, but across the state. It is a statewide problem, but certainly because San Francisco has been more tolerant and accepting of it, we're seeing we're seeing it more in our faces, and also because we're a smaller city and more compact. So the reason that we're supporting Mark is because, one, I know he wants to solve this in a more compassionate and holistic way, and two, I think that he has the skills and expertise to actually do that, and he will hold city departments accountable to doing that. And that's not something I've seen out of the current administration. Yeah.
So I have a question. So as you know, we are super passionate about ending street homelessness here at We Heart SF. And this recent article that was written about the Streets to Stability initiative that just recently came out. Could you speak for a moment on that, and what are some of your thoughts?
Yeah, so the Streets to Stability, if you Google it, this website should come up. It's a really, really great interactive website and tool. It was put together by the Crankstart Foundation, which is one of our major funders as well. And what they did, and they fund about, I think it's like 200 million annually in San Francisco. They fund a lot of homeless services, recovery services, harm reduction services, economic development nonprofits in the city. But what they did was looked at all of the city's spending on homelessness services. And I think they mapped about 245 nonprofits that receive city funding to provide some aspect of homeless services. And they mapped it all out. And some interesting takeaways. Other thing they did was they created these profiles of different demographics of people who might be homeless or need to access these services. And the website allows you to walk through what that experience is like and how complicated and confusing it is, because there are like 7 city departments administrating 250 contracts. And really what I hope it does is give a roadmap to how whoever wins this election can effectuate change and streamlining in this system so that this money is more efficiently spent and actually reaching the people who need it, and they can access those services more easily. I think the big takeaway is that the city is not effectively managing how they're spending this money. We all vote to tax ourselves more. We all vote to have more of these services, but more doesn't mean it's actually reaching the people we want it to reach, and that it's actually helping people the way we want it to be helped. And that's really what I think. I think it's a roadmap for doing that. And I really hope that whoever is elected, whether it's on the board or to the mayor's office, can work together to effectuate those changes.
Thank you.
Sure.
And if there aren't any other questions right now, I have one more question. Could you speak for just a moment on the Fentalife campaign?
Yeah. So last year, we're the organization that did the That's Fentalife campaign. It was certainly very controversial. I want to talk about why we did that, right? So when we did the ad campaign, which was like billboards, advertising, that was very, very visible. It got a lot of press coverage, but really what it was a community activation effort. All of the billboards and advertising had QR codes. People used those QR codes to send emails to City Hall, to Nancy Pelosi, to Governor Newsom to ask them to address the fentanyl crisis. Before we did that, nobody really wanted to talk about it. Nobody in elected office really wanted to address how bad things had gotten in the Tenderloin. If you think about that point in time, it was after the Tenderloin Linkage Center shut down and really left people struggling with addiction in absolute chaos on the streets. And it left those small businesses and residents in that neighborhood really, without any tools or resources of how they were going to move forward as a city. And so folks in the Tenderloin asked us to help them get attention on what was happening in the Tenderloin. And so we were happy to work with them to try to resolve this problem. We mobilized about 60,000 emails to City Hall, state and federal representatives to ask them a couple of things. The budget season, the budget process was upcoming. We asked for coordination between local, state, and federal. We asked for more funding from local, state, and federal. We asked for specifically funding for law enforcement and for law enforcement to have a role in addressing the drug crisis because that wasn't really happening. There was no coordination between the public health side and law enforcement. And that continues to be a challenge today. And two, we asked for more funding for recovery services. The city actually has a voter mandate to provide treatment on demand. They are not meeting that mandate. They are counting treatment on demand as when you call, you can get connected to buprenorphine, step-down drugs, and you can get a 2-week supply. But giving somebody who's unhoused 2 weeks of step-down drugs to then just go live outside and use does not count for us as treatment on demand. That is not treatment. We need actual mental health treatment beds and facilities that can house the people that need it, help them actually get into recovery. We were successful in getting those budgetary asks funded. And, this was a big turning point for us because it was our first big advocacy effort and people were super engaged. We were doing talks about the crisis in our event space regularly and they were, 200 people at a time coming in to hear about it. A big disappointment was that despite, after that effort, the governor sent CHP to support SFPD in arresting dealers who were coming in from out of the city. We have a federal presence now because 2 cartels are operating in parts of our city. I think we've lost a couple of blocks to cartel control, which is really crazy to think about here in San Francisco. And we now have a central coordination center down in Civic Center. All of those things are happening and we're starting to see results now. But it's been, about a year and a half later. The DA told me recently that she has 500 drug dealing defendants. So 500 drug dealers have been prosecuted and charged in San Francisco in the last year and a half. The previous DA had only charged 2. So we are taking dealers off the streets, and that's huge. And what she's observed is as the supply has reduced and access to the supply has reduced, there is now more of an interest in accepting treatment because the supply is not as readily available. So our approach to addressing supply and demand, it really is working. And it is a slow and painful process. I think the TL looks a lot better during the day and is still struggling at night. And we're hoping that, that's the next step.
And one more question for you, because we've touched on, shelter, we've touched on the drug crisis. We haven't really touched on anything related to mental health.
Yeah.
Can you share just a little bit of your thoughts on that and how we can start addressing some of the mental health crisis?
Yeah. So the last time I saw these numbers was admittedly a couple of years ago, but I assume the ratio is pretty similar. We have about 8,000 unhoused homeless people in our city, and about 4,000 of them, the city estimates, are struggling with mental health or drug addiction. So there's a lot of people who are dual diagnosis within that population as well. They're very, very hard to reach. They're very, very expensive to care for. The beds to support them are very, very hard to source and fund and have consistently available. And because folks are struggling with addiction or mental health, or sometimes both, because I think fentanyl does create some of that mental health condition in people, it's very hard to reach them and have them voluntarily accept treatment. A city official was telling me that if you've been on fentanyl for a while, you do start to have mental health issues, right? And fentanyl is a unique drug where you need it every 3 hours, you need a hit. And so within those 3 hours, you have about 30 minutes of clarity before you are in withdrawals, kind of searching for that next hit. So if we're going to wait for people to voluntarily accept treatment, we have about 30 minutes every 3 hours to try to get them into that. And so there is a need for mandated mental health or recovery treatment. The city's only tool for mandated mental health treatment is conservatorship. This has become controversial, I think, because we're all familiar with Britney Spears and how she was like completely inappropriately conserved. That's not the process here in San Francisco. So we have a local program that was written after a state law passed. Does everybody know what a 5150 is? Right. So if you're put on a 5150 hold, you're put on hold for up to 72 hours, and then you're brought to a judge to decide if that hold should be extended or not. In San Francisco, you have to be put on 8 5150 holds in a year before you can begin the conservatorship process. So the bar is very, very high, and we are waiting for people to really be a true danger to themselves or others in our streets often before we'll even start the conservatorship process. The conservatorship process looks like you get a public defender, the city attorney will have to bring a case forward to make the case to a judge of why you should be conserved because you are a danger to yourself or others, or you can no longer care for yourself. And that is like a years-long process. And usually what happens, so you have to have those 8 5150s, and we have to start conservatorship proceedings, and we have to offer you a permanent supportive housing unit, basically in perpetuity. So you can imagine the thresholds and the costs and the operational logistics for the city to manage to get someone through that process. So despite us having this law in the books, I think for about 5 years now, I think it's less than a handful of people that the city has actually conserved. Meanwhile, I know there are, for example, Supervisor Mandelman, who's supervisor of the Castro, has talked about, his office has a list of, I think, like 60 people that they know are unhoused, struggling with mental health, that are harming themselves on the streets, that they cannot get into conservatorship. But they are trying to try to help the city departments do that. So it is another place where I think very well-intentioned laws and programs are not serving people as effectively as they could be.
And what do you think the solution is to that?
I think that we have to make conservatorship a little bit easier. Like that 8 5150 threshold is probably not right. And I think we need to have more treatment beds for people so that it's like you don't have to go into full conservatorship, right? Can we find lower tier places to house and care for people for shorter periods of time that might not require? It shouldn't be nothing or conservatorship, right? And that's kind of what's happening right now.
Excellent. Thank you so much. I'll take one more question in the back, and then we'll wrap up.
I'm going to ask you the same question I threw out to Mark Farrell when he was here.
Yeah.
I'm on the board with one of our We Heart SF community members called Love Never Fails. They're based in East Bay, but they also work in San Francisco. They help victims of human trafficking. So in San Francisco, the FBI identified San Francisco as one of 13 cities in the US that's at a hot spot for child sex trafficking. And then people like Vanessa know on the ground, and there's certain laws that have been passed, like that have even made it easier for traffickers to traffic people. What's TogetherSF position on this? Is this on your agenda? What's your plan to address it?
Yeah. We don't have a formal position on it, and we don't have a formal plan to address it. The way that we have engaged on it is really been community driven. So our office is in the Mission. It's not far from Cap Street and Shotwell Street, which are really hotbeds, not just for prostitution, but for sex trafficking. And the residents on those two streets have identified that there are trafficking victims being prostituted here. And, for about a year, they were recording things. They were dealing with this problem. They couldn't get any attention from the city. We helped them get the DA to come meet with them, SFPD to come walk around with them. It was very interesting learning experience for all of us because the district supervisor was saying, well, I funded outreach workers to come and talk to these women who might be trafficked and help them get out of the situations. And the residents were saying, we've never seen an outreach worker out here once. We've never seen that. So we don't know what you're funding, but we've never seen that. And so it was another example of the city being like, oh, we're doing our part. And, we don't know what is actually happening. I'm very disappointed that what the city chose to do was basically install barricades on those streets to prevent the cruising that was happening, which just pushed it to another street. And now that street is trying to do it, right? I don't think it gets resolved without a true change in leadership that treats it as a serious problem. And I haven't really heard anybody prioritize it as a serious problem. What we do is help those neighbors organize and advocate for themselves, and we are doing more of that with them. It is like quite shocking that in such a progressive city that the fight has become whether or not the women, mostly women that are out there, are voluntary sex workers or not. Instead of how can we help everybody get out of this situation if they don't want to be in it.
Mark agreed to make this an issue and be important to him. He said this shouldn't happen. And he agreed, if he gets elected, to invite Vanessa and the subject matter experts like her into his administration to advise them on their policy. And I'd love to make that connection and love to make this an issue and make some noise, because I think we can all agree that child sex trafficking should not happen in
Yes.
San Francisco.
Yes.
And we should make this a city where that's zero tolerance.
Zero tolerance for it. Yeah, absolutely. We're happy to work with you on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kanishka.
you.
Please join me in giving her a big round of applause.